Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine, maybe to be more precise in Avdiivka on the 15th of February of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting details and updates from the fortress, from the stronghold, so let's start. And of course, before we start, few the most important updates. The Russians, as a result of very heavy clashes, of fierce battles, of offensive operation, managed to establish control over the stronghold by the name of Brivno, this is it. And today the Russian sources published the video of that process. On this video with very poor quality we can see the Russian flag who was rising above this territory. Later, a few hours later, or a few minutes later, I don't remember for sure, we got another video of the same flag but from another angle with better quality. As you can see, this is the Russian flags that was rising, let's say, in the area of the stronghold by the name of Brivno. And this is very important. There are a few important things that you need to note, because as we know, the Ukrainians start using new tactics. For example, in Krynki, the Ukrainians are using drones to establish flag and then to make immediate victory, or to use these flags as something like a trap for the Russian soldiers. And it's very easy to recognize when the flag was established by a drone, or when the flag was established by soldiers. And for example, when talking about drones, it's one story, but when talking about this flag, we see that this flag was established by a man, by hands, because this flag was something like physically established on the some material, some steel or something like this. So this is 100% confirmation of Russian presence in this area. Furthermore, I'll remind you that few weeks ago or months ago, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, was making his own video about Avdiivka, in the entrance of Avdiivka, saying that the Ukrainians would never leave or abandon Avdiivka itself. This is the yellow pipe, as you can see. That's when this video was made by Zelensky, the pipe was more or less correct without any issues. And on this video we can see that the pipe was already damaged, and let's see the time passed, and the yellow thing on the pipe took off in this area. So this is the situation. As you can see, we have adjusted and updated the map showing the Russian progress. No, we have no doubts about the Russian progress, and obviously the battle for Avdiivka is coming to an end. But this is not the only important update. Another interesting report we received from the southern direction, and another Russian video was published from the former air defense base. On this video we see another Russian soldiers who were very slowly, step by step, without being afraid of being attacked by Ukraine FPV drone, was walking in the former air defense base. Then they took the flags from their pockets and start raising the flags in this area as well. So the most important strategical positions of armed forces of Ukraine were captured by the Russians on the 15th of February of 2024. Now we can say that not just the days of Avdiivka are numbered, we can say that probably the hours of Avdiivka are numbered. The Ukrainians got an order to start abandoning their positions and start retreating and withdrawing their positions, and most of the Ukrainian forces started its movements from the eastern direction, from the southern direction, from the former air defense base, from the central part, from the 9th quarter. The Ukrainians are moving, and now the Ukrainians at a very, very big risk, and I'll explain to you why the Ukrainians at a very big risk. And today I have a feeling that very likely there is an agreement between Russia and Ukraine, because the Ukrainians don't have possibilities. We need to understand this clearly. The Ukrainians don't have possibilities to leave Avdiivka without losing up to 70% of their personnel. I'll explain to you why. First of all, let's finish with the video. We see Russian happy soldiers raising the flags, former air defense base. We see the drone flying above this territory. So 100% confirmation of Russian control. We have adjusted the map. Once again, the Ukrainians were moving something like this, and they left this area today completely, and they entered the 9th quarter. The Russians during the day were trying to bomb the Ukrainians during the withdrawing process, and very likely they managed to probably even get someone. Now let's talk about details, and let's talk about the most important part. According to information we have from the Ukrainian authorities, the Ukrainians took a decision to retreat and to start removing their forces from Avdiivka towards more reliable positions. But the most important question we have right now, whether the Ukrainians are able to do this or not. And to receive the answer to this question, we need to understand how many Ukrainians left in the central part of Avdiivka, in the chemical plant, and so on. And according to some unconfirmed updates, this information, of course, we don't have access to real information, but you know that there are soldiers, officers, they're sharing information between each other. We have some doctrine, some, let's say, some numbers, some doctrine to have units on this or that positions to hold the front line. So simple mathematics and so on. And according to information we have, there are around 8,000 soldiers in entire Avdiivka, and 3.5 thousand of Ukrainian soldiers are located in the central part, 9th quarter, former air defense base, but they abandoned their positions. In the forest been to the west of filtration station and in Kamenkov stronghold. And around 4.5 thousand soldiers currently are located in the chemical plant. So this is the situation. And now let's discuss, before we continue discussion, we need to understand the main supply and support roads and the roads that Ukrainians can use for evacuation. Let's say this is the first road that Ukrainians maybe have possibilities to use for evacuation. When talking about the stronghold Brivno and the forest to the south, obviously the Ukrainians are no longer able to use this road, so that's why very likely they can use the roads through the field, something like this, and in direction of towards 0542 road, and then in direction of through Lastichkina further to Orlovka. So these are two evacuation roads that Ukrainians still have for central, southern and the eastern part of Avdiivka. But the main question, whether the Ukrainians are able to use these roads or not. And to get answer to this question, of course, first of all, we need to take a look at this, for example, video. On this video, we can see, according to the author of this video, the situation in Avdiivka direction, and we see that very unlikely the Ukrainians can use the fields. Yes, we see that they can move, but very slowly, step by step, and the most important, with short, small groups of 10-15 soldiers. And the next important thing, with a very big interval between the movements. This is currently the most important numbers that we need to keep in our minds. The number of groups and the interval that Ukrainian can use for abandoning their positions. And we have another video also from Avdiivka direction, according to the author. You see the quality of road is very poor, no chances, the soldiers can't move, vehicles can't move, the soldiers can move, but with small groups and with a very big interval. And now let's do a simple math. Let's do the simple math once again. According to information we have, the Ukrainians in the central part, in this southern cauldron, eastern cauldron, there are around 3.5 thousand soldiers. And if we split 3.5 thousand soldiers, let's say on 15 soldiers in one group, if we split, then we're gonna understand that this is around 233 groups. So 3.5 thousand soldiers, it's around 233 evacuation groups. And if, let's say, we say that each group need, let's say, 10 minutes of interval between the next batch, so one group moves, the Russians start bombing them with artillery and so on, then after 10 minutes the second group start movement, or let's say it's the minimal, let's say, distance of timings between one and another group. And if we are using this number 10 minutes, I took this number softly. I'm not saying that this is something like doctrine or the standard for these purposes. I'm just trying to imagine the situation. Then the Ukrainians need, if we have 233 groups, then the Ukrainians need up to 2,333 minutes for evacuation process of the situation. And if we split this number for 60 minutes in 1 hour, then we're going to receive around 40 hours. The Ukrainians need around 40 hours to complete the evacuation from the central part of Avdiivka. The question I have, and probably you have the same question, whether the Ukrainians have these 40 hours or not. And when talking about the development of the situation, I must say that Ukrainians don't have 40 hours. And once again, don't forget, when we were making all these calculations, we made one important, let's say, thing, one important note, one important thing we based our calculations on, and we are talking about the fact that the Russians, according to this logic, stopped moving. So they achieved some progress on the south, they achieved some progress in the vicinity of Brivno stronghold, and after that the Russians took a decision to stop. And now the Ukrainians have additional 40 hours for evacuation. Of course the Russians are not going to stop. Of course the Russians are going to move further. Of course the Russians are planning to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities and the roads and the neck of this Avdiivka cauldron. And of course the number of forces in each group can be reduced. Of course the interval can be increased because of less and less possibilities for evacuation. So this is the cauldron. This is the mathematic formula of this Avdiivka cauldron. 40 hours of evacuation. Another important thing, when talking about 40 hours that Ukrainians need for evacuation, I am saying, and we are assuming that this case, most of the Ukrainian forces are already, let's say, located along the line of industrial ave. So let's say somewhere here. So the 3.5 thousands are located here, and very slowly, step by step, meter by meter, the Ukrainians are moving further to the western edge, and with the small groups, they continue evacuation. This formula works just for this situation. But when talking about the Ukrainians who are currently located in Kamyanka, the distance between this stronghold till the, let's say, 9th quarter is around 6 kilometers. Can you imagine yourself a group of Ukrainian soldiers, let's say 200 soldiers, take a decision, or they received an order that they can abandon their positions, and they start, it's like straight line, 6 kilometers, and they start moving like this. Do you think they are able to reach 9th quarter? I think they don't have these possibilities. The same story we can say about the Ukrainian soldiers that currently are located in the filtration station. The distance from these positions to this is the same, 6 kilometers. Do you believe they have chances for evacuation? Another 200 or 300 soldiers? I don't think they have these chances. So this is the situation. This is the cauldron. And once again, this is why I told you at the beginning of video that only the Ukrainians can evacuate. But the only way the Ukrainians can do this if they have agreements with Moscow, with Putin probably personally. Now Putin decides whether these soldiers have chances to survive, or they will get into the prison and become prisoners of war. Furthermore, once again, another assumptions we made at the beginning of all these calculations is that the Russians stopped and they're not going to move further. But we understand that the Russians are going to move further. And to tell the truth, you know that Ukrainians the Russians, surprised me. They surprised me with their tactics. We discussed at the beginning about the Russian progress in this area, but later the Russians moved further to the western part and they established control over Brivno. And to tell the truth, based on even deep state map and other mappers, I will not be surprised if we receive an update that the Russians continue movements further in direction of Lastachkina. This is not something like my projections. This is like some assumption that I will not be surprised if we see something like this, because we see that Ukrainians have significant problems in their defense, and let's say based on the previous progress, based on the Russian achievements on the ground, there are very big high chances and very likely that the Russians may try to do something like this. And once again, I will not be surprised if I see something like this. And if the Russians are able to do this, the Ukrainians, even small groups, 10 groups and soldiers in group, 15 soldiers in one group, 10 minutes interval, 5 minutes interval, an hour interval. From this perspective, the Ukrainians will lose complete chances to evacuate and to abandon their positions in Avdiivka. They're going to have just one smart way to surrender. And furthermore, this progress of the Russian forces, of course, can give them another benefit. They will be able to have encircled the chemical plant, where, according to the Russian sources, additional 4.5 thousand soldiers of Ukrainian armed forces are located. This is not going to be like encirclement or cauldron, but this is something like from the beginning another operational encirclement. The main roads will be under fire control. And the Russians can do this easily. At least I will not be surprised once again. But another important thing, we have probably summarized everything about the situation. Another important thing that I would like to discuss with you is, of course, how did it happen? How did it happen? Because the Ukrainians were counting on the third separate assault brigade Azov that was redeployed from Kiev to Avdiivka with the purpose to stabilize the situation, probably to support and to hold the defense belts evacuation road while the main forces will evacuate. But we see that nothing like that happened. So the question, how did that happen? And today we received significant number of reports from the 3rd Azov brigade. They published their own opinion, their personal opinion opinion about the situation, and to tell the truth, my first opinion of when I read their articles, the 3rd Brigade was shocked. They were shocked when they saw the hell they were sent in. They were shocked, and basically they refused to follow the order. This is the only explanation with the simple language that 3rd Azov Brigade refused to follow the orders. We have some details from different sources from the ground about the appearance of the 3rd Azov Brigade, and the brigade itself says that when they sent, it wasn't something unexpected. This is the post of this 3rd Brigade. They're calling this post Avdiivka hell. They were sent to this brigade. It wasn't something new, and when they arrived in this area, they reported that they were forced to fight with the angle of 360 degrees. So it was like something like encircle defense. So they were attacked by the Russians from every side, and there were hundreds of Russians, according to them, wave by wave, without counting losses, according to them. The Russians were sending troopers to penetrate and to collapse and to capture additional territories. So they were shocked, and basically they were afraid of everything, because they realized, they understood when they appeared in Avdiivka that the Ukrainian authorities took a decision to use 1 brigade to save, let's say, 7 brigades that are currently located inside of Avdiivka. And they took a decision, why should we die when somebody did a mistake in the past, like maybe Syrsky or maybe Zaluzhny? And this is the reason that why 3rd Brigade took a decision to also abandon their positions and to leave Avdiivka. So this is the case. This is the first case in the Ukrainian history when the entire brigade, when arrived, like elite, like that's the superstar, rock star brigade arrived in Avdiivka, and they took a decision, no, we are not going to die for nothing, and we are going to move. Furthermore, the Russian sources give more details about the situation. The Russians are saying that the 3rd Brigade arrived in Avdiivka, and just for 4 days of clashes, when they arrived, they lost a battalion and a half. Around 600 soldiers of Rockstar Brigade lost just for 4 days of clashes. And they're saying that nothing was prepared. No positions, no machine gun positions, no trenches, no strongholds, no shelters. And if there were trenches, strongholds, and many other things, most of them were occupied by the Ukrainian soldiers, and those Ukrainian soldiers wasn't very pleased to see Azov forces with them in the same trenches. So when Azov Brigade arrived in Avdiivka, according to information we have, they were forced to start the building of the stronghold from the scratch. And of course they refused. It's not their job. They should arrive and to fight, let's say, somewhere in Monaco or on the beaches of Monaco or something like this, but not in the hell of Avdiivka. And they left their positions. And after that, everything collapsed, and the Ukrainian authorities took a decision to announce about evacuation of everything and anything from this area. So this is the situation that we combine, summarize from facts, from rumors, from pictures, from geolocations, from everything we have as of, let's say, the evening of the 15th of February of 2024. Obviously, this is the end game of Avdiivka. No chances for the Ukrainians to do anything. The only thing they can do right now is probably somehow to finish and to save their faces. When talking about Europe, no support, no help neither from United States of America, from Europe, from France. Today, Olaf Scholz reported about additional military aid for another 100 million euros, but no tanks, no armored vehicles. And when talking about the Russians, they just finished the production of another batch of modernized, well-equipped, modern T-80 tanks. A significant number of them were sent once again to the line of combat contact for the Russians to increase the pressure. And you know that the bad stories for the Ukrainians didn't end today with this piece of news. Probably the most biggest updates are coming after Avdiivka is Ivanovsk, and the third place is Robotyne. We know that recently the Russians have removed this front line. They included this front line to Kherson direction, but today the official Ukrainian military authorities reported that the Russians have concentrated significant number of forces on Zaporozhye direction, and there are more forces that on Avdiivka direction. Imagine yourself, according to the latest update we have, the Russians used around 40,000 soldiers to establish control over Avdiivka. So probably and very likely there are around 60,000 soldiers on Zaporozhye direction. And if you ask my opinion, I would say that the Russians don't need 60,000 soldiers to establish control over the ruins and the parts that left from Rabotina. Obviously, they don't need 60,000 soldiers. If the Russians concentrated here 60,000 soldiers, very likely the Russians have further plans to move further, even to Orekhov or something like this. We have concentration of fire here. We have some concentration of Ukrainian FPV drone strikes. We saw during the previous days the Russian attacks from Kopany to Rabotina and how those attacks were repelled by 65th Mechanized Brigade. We see everything, but if you ask my opinion, I don't think that the Russians are going to attack in Rabotina, because my opinion is that the Russians are planning to activate their clashes and intensify their activity on Kamyansk, Kolobkovo, Stepnogorsk direction. During February, the Russians published significant number of geolocations of artillery bombings of Ukrainian positions, of ammo depots, of Ukrainian temporary positions, artillery forces. So everything was under very heavy fire during the previous weeks. So significant concentration of Russian fire. And if the Russians are going to start their activity in Zaporozhye, very likely they're going to move along Dnipro River, along the bank of Dnipro River in direction of course, the city by the name of Zaporozhye. So something like this, and with the purpose and of course, the main purpose of the Russian movements, these Russian movements, is not to attack Zaporozhye. 60,000 soldiers is not enough to establish control over the almost 1 million populated area, but the Russians by this attack can encircle and bypass Orekhov from the west to cut the main supply roads and then to handle with this stronghold. Very likely the Russians are planning to do something like this, or the Russians are trying to force the Ukrainians to think like this. Who knows? Anyway, soon we're gonna see this, because as we discussed, the numbers of Avdiivka, the hours of Avdiivka are numbered, and after the end of Avdiivka, very likely the Russians will launch the second offensive operation. A small, but there are still a lot of towns. There are still Novomikhailivka, half of the village is already captured by the Russians. The Russians are pushing and storming Ivanovskaya. Today we got more details and updates. As we discussed, the Russians managed to even answer this village from the north, from the west, from the east, from the southeast. The Russians continue bombing Chasov Yar with FABs. So when talking about this territory, also the situation in this under complete Russian control, and there are very heavy chances that within the next days we're going to receive more updates and additional Russian progress in Ivanovska, and additional collapse and another collapse of additional Ukrainian front on this direction. When talking about the situation in this area, we haven't received anything in comparison with the previous update that we discussed in the morning, but probably today the people were mainly focused on Avdiivka, the situation around, but as I understand, tomorrow we're going to receive more updates from this area as well. Kupiansk-Liman direction, we haven't received lots of updates, but I must say a few things about Liman direction. During the previous few days, we stopped receiving any updates about further Russian progress, and we can have an opinion or feeling that the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the front line and so on, but this is not true, because if we move to the table of the calculation of Ukrainian losses during the previous 4 days, starting of the 12th of February, basically starting of the day when we stopped receiving any updates about any Russian progress, the Ukrainians lost 1,225 soldiers. 3 battalions the Ukrainians lost during the previous 4 days, with one purpose: to slow down and stop the Russians. So the Ukrainians stabilized the front line, but with the heaviest losses from their side, and obviously sooner or later they will be out of reserves, out of forces, and the Russians will continue movements further to Zhiribets River. So another collapse of the front line is very soon. When talking about Kupiansk area, we have additional geolocated video of Russian control in the northern part of Sinkovka. On this video we can see how the Ukrainian tank Bradley was attacking the Russian positions. This video, as you can see, was made when there was a snow, so it's like a January positions, but anyway, according to the most of the mappers, this territory is still under Russian control. So anyway, no progress, no movements, and for now this is the situation on this territory. And probably another important thing that we should discuss is that Ukrainians during the previous day, during the 15th of February, attacked with multi-launch rocket system Vampire of Czech production the Belgorod city, and the Ukrainians attacked the mall. As you can see, this is the mall that was almost ruined, and the stadium. And as a result of that attack, there were around 6 dead people, 6 killed and 10 wounded, and there were also children among them. So the situation is terrible, and I recognize this attack as a terrorist because this attack took place against the residential area. Obviously, once again, the Germany is planning to provide another military help for 100 millions. Of course, it's nothing in comparison with the Russian production each month. And today we got even a video how the Putin visited another factory where the Russians produce more than T-90, T-80, T-70, T-2 tanks with a significant number of them. So the Russians are producing tanks like bullets, the number of and quality and quantity of these types of weapon. And the most important statement from Putin we also got today. He reported that he during the special military operation during the previous 10 years, he made one very big mistake. And he is saying that it was a very big mistake that he started special military operations so late. He should have started this operation, according to him, much earlier. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.